Okay, so what I want to do real quick is just go over, I guess, some basic commands that I really think most people are doing any form of, I guess, terminal-based programming or just navigation in general should be pretty intimately familiar with these. If you're going to be doing anything in an embedded space, operating system space, system administration space, or honestly, even if you're just getting more used to programming as a whole, and you're not familiar with terminal-based commands and stuff like that, this is a decent subset to get used to. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive list of everything that would be useful, but these are probably some of the ones I use the absolute most and help me the absolute most. Now, obviously, I use more than just this. I use some alternate versions of these if you have more modern variants, but those are not going to come default with most systems and everything. So this is what you should be able to experience on pretty much any Unix-based system. Some of these are present on Windows systems as well, with a few differences here and there. So this can work on Windows, but if you're on Linux, Mac OS, BSD, these are almost always going to be present there. So without further ado, let's swap over the sides and take a look. So just some basic Unix commands is kind of the idea here. So, all right. First thing is befriending the terminal. If you are doing any development on a Unix system and you're doing anything, again, in one of those sectors, whether it be embedded programming, networking is a huge one, anything, again, in systems level programming territory, you need to get familiar with your system's terminal, the shell, that'd be bash or zsh. If you use your own, I technically use a fish shell for a lot of things, although I use a variety of other ones as well. Even if you're on Windows, if you're in systems level programming for Windows, it may not be C, it could be C# or something. It could just be shell programming. You're going to use PowerShell a lot on Windows, and that's perfectly fine. You can actually use PowerShell on Linux and Mac OS. I do that occasionally when it comes to some system administration stuff. It's honestly pretty good. But regardless of what environment you're in or anything, getting used to shell navigation, file handling, and things of that sort should basically be secondhand nature to you at some point. Whether it's just navigating through your directory tree, trying to print out the contents of files, looking at file permissions and whatnot, and just trying to, I guess, being able to navigate is something that you should be able to do without even really thinking about it. And it may not come natural at first, but it's something you should get practiced with to a point that it just becomes something that does become natural. And it might take a little bit of time. You could do it really quickly. It doesn't matter. As long as you get used to it, nothing hurts. So, the absolute, well, I guess in my opinion, most ubiquitous command, and probably the one I most habitually type in at all times, besides the clear command, I am notorious on always clearing out my terminal, and it's honestly funny to a lot of people, but besides that, ls for list is one of the commands I use the absolute most, and it's just because I like to be able to see what am I currently looking at, or what is in a different file somewhere else. Like what are the files I'm working with currently? If I'm going to navigate over to another actual directory, what's there? What are my permissions? And just a whole variety of other things. So ls lets you do that. And if you look here, I'm going to have the man pages for these and a more, I guess, user-friendly variant of it. Somebody has a website posted with some more comprehensive, I suppose, information. I think it's really good. I think both of these are really good resources, so I'm going to have them linked here. But beyond that, we have a few parameters for them, and I'll be using these throughout. You can type them in one at a time, so like ls minus l minus g minus o minus a, or you can just do ls minus l g o a if you wanted to do that. One more ubiquitous one here is ls minus l. You will see me do it like this very frequently. If you run ls by itself up here at the top, it just gives you the actual contents here. So you can see I have two text files and a directory. Not a big deal. But if I do ls-l, I get a whole lot more information. I get the actual owners, the groups, file size and everything. You can actually see that these are just empty text files. I just made them for the purpose of doing this. Last time they're edited basically, or file permissions. So if we look at this, I can see that's read, write, read, read. That's going to be the ubiquitous 644 and then a 755 for the directory. Not a big deal. It just gets you more information and it's genuinely very helpful. ls-a, this one over here, it stands for basically all. And the only thing that you'll notice different between this one, let me clear this up a little bit, and this top one is it just adds these two things right here. So a dot slash and a dot dot slash. Those are still directories, but Unix systems use dot files to reference the current directory that you're in, and dot dot for the previous directory. So if you ever see somebody do cd dot dot, that's them navigating one step up the actual directory tree. If you see ls-la, it's the same thing as my ls-l, but it includes the detailed information of dot and dot dot. And you can see that since we have that, the D in the actual listed out permissions, that does indicate that these are directories. So you can use those when you're doing navigation, a whole lot of things. You'll honestly see me say do dot slash quite frequently. It's not always required to do dot slash if you're referencing something in your current directory, but I do it habitually because it will let me know at all times I'm referencing something in my current directory, not in my file system path or anything like that. So it's kind of a habit for me. It's not necessarily required, but you will notice it quite frequently as we go through these slides. Anyway, this is just basically your ubiquitous list command. It's present on Windows as well in a specific format. If you run it on Windows, it kind of defaults to ls-l, which a lot of time I just wish that Unix systems also defaulted to ls-l, but it is what it is. If you're on a Ubuntu, maybe Debian system, and you run ll, it's an alias for ls-l, so you'll see that pretty frequently too. But I digress. Beyond that, we have pwd, which I think if you're on Windows, this is cwd. It is basically present working directory. If you see certain languages like C, I don't know if C actually does CWD. I think Python does CWD if I'm not mistaken. It can also stand for current working directory. So pwd is present working directory, CWD, if you see that, is current working directory. They basically are just saying, hey, you are here. That's my path. I use that pretty frequently when I'm doing with other scripts or whatnot. Maybe I just want to see the entire full path to where I am. If I need to use that as like a string or something, it just is nice to be able to see what is the actual full path to my current directory. So if I look in my actual shell prompt, you'll see the ~/temp. Tilde is going to be an alias for your user's home directory. So the slash, which is the root directory, home directory, your user directory, is basically the same thing as a tilde here, which is really nice to have because you can just do like, yeah, when we get to CD, you can use that tilde as a shorthand for saying, hey, go to my home directory. Now on that, CD stands for change directory. So we use it to change a directory and navigate through our actual directory tree. It is probably maybe behind ls, or maybe you use it more than ls, I don't know. I use them pretty interchangeably. I'll use ls again and say, hey, what's in my current directory right now? What can I get to? And you'll see that I do cd./dir1 to navigate right here. So this is what I'm saying. I do / pretty habitually. You don't have to do / there. You could just do cd dir1 and it would basically interpret that, hey, this is in your current directory. You can just go directly there. I do / just out of habit. It's not required. Call myself out there. And the next thing I do is cd dot dot. Again, this is your previous directory. So you'll notice in this first one, I am currently at my home temp, and then I do cd dot dir, and all of a sudden my location now is temp dir1. I do cd dot dot, and I go back to the temp directory because I'm going one up in my directory tree, and that lets me do /dir2 for the next one. If I wanted to do, I can chain these together. I could technically do from dir1 cd dot dot /dir2, which would essentially combine these two commands into one. So you can put in a long string for the actual path that you want to go to. And as long as it's a valid path, it'll work. So if I want to do, hey, I'm in this current directory, I want to go 5 directories up, I could do cd dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot, and that would take me 5 directories up in my tree. If you are 5 directories down, that's pretty deep. But who knows, your project might have a lot of, nested folders and stuff like that. So it could be relevant. If you do have a structure like that, it either sounds like pain or like it might need to be restructured, but it happens. And you can get as far through your directory tree as you want to just by chaining them together. As long as it's a valid path, you're good. Beyond that, we start with actual file handling commands. This one being mkdir or makedir. It pretty much just makes a directory. That's kind of pretty much it. So you can either make a directory where you currently are, or you can pass a full path to it, and it will make directories elsewhere in your actual system. So if I look over here on the right for my little sample, I do my ubiquitous ls to kind of show you, hey, this is what's currently in my directory. I'm going to do mkdir ./dir1 ./dir2 that just says, hey, I want to make these 2 directories in my current directory. After that, I do ./dir1 dir1 minus 1, and then ./dir2 dir2 minus 1. So that is going to make directories in 2 separate branches for my directory tree. So one's going to make a directory in the dir1 directory that I made right here, and then this one here will be made in the branch that was made right here. So it is just kind of nesting things further down in different branches. So if I do ls dir1, you'll notice the 1 minus 1 that I made right here. If I do ls dir2, you'll notice the one that I did right here, essentially. So you can make this as flexible as you want. All it's doing is just making a directory somewhere in your file system. Again, if you want to make one previous directories and whatnot, you can do dot dot. No big deal. As long as it's a valid path, you're good. Touch, okay. There are various ways to make files in your system. One of the most common ones to just make a new file is the touch command. And all it does is it essentially just makes an empty file wherever you specify in the system. So again, if I look here, I run ls in this temporary directory I got, it's empty. If I do touch dat1.txt, dat2.txt, and then I run ls, you'll see, hey, I've made 2 text files in this directory. After that, I make a new directory where I currently am called sample, and I do touch ./sample sample.txt, which makes a new text file in the directory I just made right here. So if I run ls to my current directory I just made, you'll see that I made one in a directory different than where I currently am. Because it's the same process. As long as you know the path, you can essentially create a file right over there, no big deal. And again, they're just empty files, and then you can open them in an editor, You can send data to them, no big deal. They're made using the 644 permissions by default, so generally not too bad. RM is kind of the exact opposite. RM is a little bit interesting. So if we run just RM by itself, no actual parameters, it's perfectly fine for removing a file. It gets a little bit interesting when we get to directories. So if we look, RM-R will recursively remove directories and their contents. So let's say that I had a file structure that, let's say my current directory was right here in, let's say dir. All right, and this currently now has two directories, maybe one that's dir1, and then over here of, you know, dir2. All right, so if I were to try to, and I'll just assume that there is some contents in both of these directories. If I tried to remove like dir1 by itself, which is rm, it's not going to let me do it. Possibly because like this is not an empty directory. It's not going to let you just delete everything in there without this parameter, because this parameter basically specifies, hey, remove this directory and any contents that it happens to have inside of it. So if it had like 12 nested directories, all of them full of files, it'll start here and it'll basically cascade everything inside of it from this point on is all getting removed from the system. It just makes sure that you are specifying, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to delete everything in it so you don't accidentally delete something that you didn't mean to. And so if I were to do, you know, rm-r on this directory here, it would delete both of these as well because they're contained inside of this, and it would delete everything inside of that as well. So -r is how we deal with removing directories. And a lot of time what you'll end up doing is -rf instead. So it's recursively remove directories and do a force removal. So it's basically, if I want to guarantee, hey, I want this directory gone, everything inside of it go away, you'll see something like this right here, rm-rf./sample. And then since we're in the point of removing, this isn't just with remove, you'll see this with lots of things, but using an asterisk as a wildcard can be very, very helpful, but it is something that should be used with caution, because once you commit to doing that, it is going to use everything with that naming scheme in mind. So if you look over here on the right of my sample, I do my standard ls to see, hey, what's in my current directory. You can see I have those two text files and this directory of sample. What I do is I run rm star or asterisk .txt. But what that is telling my system to do is remove any file that ends in .txt. If I wanted to do, say, instead of this, do dat star, it would remove any file that starts with that. So it just is a wildcard essentially, and it will fill in any possible text. And like if I did rm star, it would remove every single file in my current directory, because it would just be anything that matches this, which is literally just any string. What I'm doing here is specifying any string that statically ends with .txt, which happens to be dat1.txt and dat2.txt. So now when I run ls, you just have sample. And so if I do ls.sample, you can see I have that text file in there. And so from dir, which contains sample, I do rm-rf./sample, saying, hey, I want to move my current directory recursively, so it's going to delete everything inside of it. And then once I run ls after that, you can see that dir is now completely empty because it doesn't show any contents. From there, we have cp, stands for copy. So we're going to copy files and directories. Still have to use the -r to recursively get all the contents of directories. And CP, and the next one that's going to come after this, is where things get maybe a little bit more complex, essentially. So if I do ls, I see I have this directory. If I ls into the actual directory itself, you'll see I have a sample.txt file. So temp dir currently contains a directory named dir1. That dir1 directory currently contains a file called sample.txt. So what I want to do is I want to copy everything that is dir1 to a new directory of its own name, but still contains all the same contents. So I do cp -r, so it's going to recursively copy that directory, all the contents inside of it. And this is basically saying copy dir. The next one here, the second path, is saying where to copy it to. So copy ./dir1, so my current directory's directory, to a new directory located in the same current directory. So now these two would be siblings in the actual directory tree. So from my current directory, I would do ls.dir2, just like I did right here, and you'll see it creates the same copy, but also has that exact same file. So now I have dir1 and dir2, which are identical copies of each other. If I had 86 files, 12 depth directory, all of them full files, they would be identical down to the actual bit fields in those files. This is exact copies of each other, essentially. Only difference is the name of their roots. So dir1, dir2, that's the only difference between these directory tree copies, essentially. And so the next one is mv, which stands for move. This is essentially the exact same thing as copy. The only difference, the source is removed. So if we look at copy, it's basically you have the command, the source, and the destination. Move has the same thing. You have move, the source, and the destination. And with copy, it's not that big of a deal, because if you copy something, you still retain the original copy of that. So you're not losing anything, essentially. When you do move, it is a much, I don't want to say dangerous ordeal, but you have to use more caution when it comes to move. You're still going to retain the same data, but the original source is going to be removed. If you can think about this for something that might be more familiar for people that might not be as used to programming and whatnot, it's like copy paste versus cut paste. Copy paste, you're going to take the actual source and you're going to make a copy of it somewhere else, but now you have two copies at the end of the day. Whereas with cut paste, you're cutting a source of text or a file or something, and you're basically moving it somewhere else. You lose the original, but that original is just retained and relocated, essentially. So we often use that to rename files or folders in the terminal and whatnot, because there is no, like, at least I don't think there is, like a rename command or anything like that. You just use a move. So in my sample, I have the same thing, ls, I see dir1, that has dat1.txt. So I'm going to move my source of dir1 to a new dir2 destination. So when I do ls.dir2, you'll see I have dat1.txt, the same thing that was in this. And it's like, well, I'm in directory 2 now, so I want my, that name to be the same thing. So I do, and this is how I do a rename. So I would say, hey, move ./dir2 dat1.txt to ./dir2 dat2.txt. The only difference here, this one changes to a 2. So when I run ls, now you can see that I have renamed the file to dat2.txt. So either we can use it to move it to a different place in our file system entirely, or we can use it to just do an in-place like rename change. So we're not changing the contents of the file or my directory or anything like that. It's just doing a quick name change. One other thing, move does not require the -r parameter to do recursion, it is implied that you are wanting to do that. So when it comes to RM and to CP, you have to specify the -r parameter, say I want to recursively do this action. With MV, it is implied that you are meaning to do that. So do keep that in mind. I think finally, we have the cat command, which is some people's very favorite command because they like cats. But it's honestly genuinely a very nice command because it just lets you look at the contents of a file at just a quick glance. There are more in-depth ones like less and more that you can use to do a better job of looking at the contents, so that you kind of scroll through them essentially at your own pace. But if you just need like to quickly print the contents of a file just so you can just kind of get a glance at it, cat is fantastic. So in this case, I just ls. I have these two files right here, and if I want to see, hey, what's in this actual file itself, I just do cat hello.txt. I do /hello, again, / is just habitual for me, and it just says hello world. And if I do the same thing, but for sample.txt, it just says this is some text. So it's just a really nice way to get a cursory glance at what's inside a file. If this was like a 2,000 line long file, cat might not be your best solution because it's just going to vomit that text into the terminal, and you'd have to, if you don't have terminal scrollback, so like if you're in a TTY or if you're in an SSH system or you don't have like a fancy terminal emulator, you just have like an actual raw basically teleprompt, basically, you might not be able to have scrollback to see everything, and you would need to use a different command for this. But that's getting into more weeds that we're not going to touch on here. So again, like I said, this is not a comprehensive list of all the terminal commands that would be useful. These are just ones that I think at the bare minimum should be familiar. So with all that being said, I do hope that this is helpful for getting you started with getting familiar with terminal commands. If you already knew some of these, hopefully it kind of shed some light on other use cases for them, or I guess more solidifies how these commands are used and why you see them so frequently everywhere. So regardless, I hope this is helpful. I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next video.